Welcome to the Explainer. So, imagine for just a second that you are a geneticist. You've just run the most comprehensive DNA comparison of ancient civilizations ever attempted. We're talking Native American genomes stacked up against every major ancient civilization on record. We are looking at the genetic codes of the ancient Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Indus Valley, and Siberia. You sit down to review the data, expecting to confirm exactly what everyone already believes. But instead, one result comes back that completely defies logic. It's a signal so geographically impossible that your first instinct is to assume your million-dollar sequencing equipment is just broken, but it isn't. Today, we are looking at the DNA anomaly that is literally rewriting the history of the Americas.
Okay, let's dive right into this. For decades, the story of how humans first arrived in the Americas felt incredibly settled. It was this comfortable, airtight narrative that made perfect geographic sense. We all learned it in school, we saw it in museums, and honestly, it went totally unquestioned. But what if that neat, tidy textbook story is actually missing a massive, mind-bending chapter? Because as it turns out, genetics really doesn't care about our comfortable stories.
To really understand this anomaly, we've got to look at the baseline first, the classic Bering land bridge model. The consensus went exactly like this. Somewhere around 20,000 years ago, a group of ancient people crossed a land bridge from Siberia into North America. By about 15,000 years ago, they spread southward, eventually becoming the ancestors of every single indigenous group from the frozen Arctic all the way down to Patagonia. It was a clean, linear model. Textbooks printed it, and the case was considered closed, an open and shut deal.
But then, the early 2000s rolled around and brought the genetics revolution right along with it. We finally developed the computational tools to sequence ancient DNA at scale. We weren't just looking at one genetic marker here or there anymore. We were doing actual, full genome comparisons. Scientists began extracting DNA from ancient bone fragments, teeth, and living populations spread across 4 continents. And they asked a beautifully simple question. Who is most closely related to whom, and by exactly how much?
For a while, the genetics perfectly backed up the archaeology. The migration model held totally strong. But then came the year 2012. Think of this year as the inciting incident for a literal scientific earthquake. Almost as a tiny footnote in a much broader genetic study, something unimaginably strange appeared in the data. It was a signal that nobody ordered, a genetic echo that, according to everything we knew about human history, simply had no business being there.
Researchers actually dubbed this mysterious echo Population Y. And I've got to say, the name is beautiful. The Y isn't just a random letter. It stands for the word Yapiquera from the indigenous Tupi-Guarani language, which translates to ancestor. It basically means, hey, we have absolutely no idea where these people came from, but they were here, they were real, and their DNA is still sitting inside living human beings. And just to be completely sure this wasn't some fluke, David Reich, one of the most respected population geneticists alive at Harvard, ran the numbers every single way his team could possibly think of. The signal survived every test. It was absolutely statistically robust.
So where exactly did this anomaly pop up? Deep within the Brazilian rainforest. A tiny, incredibly concentrated cluster of living Amazonian tribes, specifically the Surai, the Caritiana, and the Xavante, showed a genetic affinity that totally broke the map. This genetic code did not point back toward Siberia. It didn't point toward East Asia. Instead, it pointed straight out across the Pacific Ocean. It pointed toward Aboriginal Australians, Melanesians, and the Andaman Islanders of the Indian Ocean.
17,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the distance, in kilometers, of deep open ocean that separates the Amazon rainforest from Australia. How on earth do living Amazonian tribes carry genetic material that is more closely related to Aboriginal Australians than to any other living population on the entire planet? It's wild.
I mean, it literally forces us to ask the ultimate question, right? How did a Pacific-linked population end up smack in the middle of the Amazon? Why are they only found in certain specific tribes and not spread all across North and South America if they supposedly came across the land bridge? Let's explore exactly how science is trying to solve this mind-bending puzzle.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we're weighing the 2 main theories attempting to explain it, and honestly, neither of them are simple. The first hypothesis is a completely separate overland migration event, meaning an Australasian-related group made it to the Americas incredibly early via some unknown path and largely disappeared. The second hypothesis is even wilder, an ancient maritime Pacific crossing. Thousands of years before the Polynesians navigated the seas, could ancient humans have crossed the open ocean? Well, we know humans reached Australia 65,000 years ago by crossing open water, so it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
Right now, the leading scientific hypothesis leans heavily toward that first idea, a separate, incredibly early migration. It suggests that population Y actually arrived in the Americas first. They spread into South America, but were then largely absorbed or replaced by the massive, later Siberian wave of migration that swept down through the continents. This perfectly explains why the signal is so geographically concentrated today. These specific Amazonian tribes represent a last refugium. They are living, breathing genetic time capsules of a chapter in human history that we had almost forgotten entirely.
But wait, the plot thickens even more when we look at a fascinating discovery known as the Malta Boy.
And this brilliantly illustrates that the Amazon wasn't the only place hiding a massive genetic secret. In 2013, researchers sequenced a 24,000-year-old genome from a child buried in south-central Siberia, the Malta Boy, and it completely upended the idea of a single founding event for Native Americans. The Malta Boy revealed that modern Native Americans didn't just descend from one East Asian group. Roughly one-third, or 33%, of the ancestry of most Native American groups comes from a ghost population called ancient North Eurasians. These were people who stretched across northern Eurasia long before the modern population structure of Asia even existed.
So, when we synthesize all of this groundbreaking data, a totally new, stunningly complex map of the Americas emerges. Instead of one unified wave of people, we are looking at least 3 founding streams converging on the continent. You have the East Asian-related group, you have the ancient North Eurasians, and deep in the Amazon, you have the mysterious population Y. 3 distinct layers of humanity meeting in a continent supposedly sealed off by ice and geography.
But you might be wondering, what about other ancient civilizations?
This brings up a truly fascinating point from that massive original study we talked about earlier. If the human map is this incredibly mobile, what about the great ancient civilizations? Researchers specifically checked for genetic contact with the heavyweights of the ancient world. They checked the pre-dynastic mummies of Egypt. They checked Bronze Age Mesopotamian remains. They checked the ancient Greek, Anatolian, and Indus Valley populations. And the result? 0 significant genetic relationship. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans acted as genuine, impenetrable barriers protecting the Americas from the Old World civilizations. But, and this is the incredible exception, that strong genetic link remained to Aboriginal Australians.
And why is that? Well, because this connection isn't really about linking to a civilization in the way we traditionally define the word. Aboriginal Australians and Melanesians separated from the main out-of-Africa migration extremely early. They are among the most ancient continuous lineages of modern humans on Earth. Finding their genetic relatives in the Amazon is finding a connection that predates most of what we call civilization by tens of thousands of years. It is a breathtaking 65,000-year-old unbroken thread of human resilience.
Which actually brings us to a really beautiful realization. Science is finally catching up to indigenous history.
So the crucial point is that indigenous communities already knew they possessed a complex history long before anyone hauled a DNA sequencer into the jungle. The tribes carrying the population Y ancestry, like the Sarui, have known for a very long time that their origins were unique. Their own deep oral traditions explicitly describe ancestors who came from a totally different direction than the others. Anthropologists and linguists had noted divergent physical features and dialects for decades. Western science often assumes it is the first to discover something, but in reality, DNA just gave researchers a new vocabulary to finally hear what indigenous people had been saying all along.
I absolutely love this quote right here, because it perfectly captures the philosophical shift happening right now. The human story is not a tree with clean branches. It's an unruly, overlapping, constantly surprising web. We like to think of human prehistory as neat little waves of migration moving predictably out of a central origin point. But the reality is messier. It is far more chaotic and, honestly, it is so much more beautiful. Populations we thought were totally isolated were actually connecting across unimaginable distances.
Now, does this mean the Bering Land Bridge never existed? No, the land bridge was totally real, and the main migration model remains largely intact. But it's no longer the whole story. Frankly, it never was. Every single time a new ancient genome gets sequenced, every time a new computational model is run on a fresh dataset, the picture gets a little more complex and a little more honest. Our history isn't just being dug out of the dirt with trowels anymore, it's being read in the 4-letter code inside ancient bone fragments.
Which leaves us with this incredibly thrilling question to close on today. If our ancient ancestors were this resilient, this mobile, and this deeply connected across vast oceans and ice ages, what else are we about to discover hiding right inside our own DNA?
we are at the very beginning of understanding the full map of humanity, and the truth is clearly so much stranger and so much more profound than any single origin story ever captured. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I cannot wait to explore the next great mystery with you.